A homeless girl's hidden plea. A single note, passed from a librarian's hand into a world of leather and loyalty. What unfolds is a race against time, a clash of two worlds, and a shocking demonstration of what happens when an untouchable empire decides to protect the most vulnerable. If you're new here, subscribe and comment your location. Now let's begin. The ragged, yellowed edge of paper caught between pages 209 and 210 of a battered copy of Where the Red Fern Grows was the only thing that saved Daniel's afternoon from utter, soul-crushing boredom. He was supposed to be reshelving the weekend returns, a task that made watching paint dry feel like a Formula One race. He plucked the note free, his librarian's heart sighing at the desecration of a book, and unfolded it. The handwriting was a child's, shaky but deliberate, written in smudged pencil. "To anyone who finds this," it began, and Daniel's breath hitched. "My name is Lucy, I'm 12. We're staying in the old green van by the dumpsters behind the old fish-packing plant on Dock 7 Street. They took my little brother Sam, he's only 6. They came last night, 2 men with a black van. They said they'd give him a warm bed. I tried to stop them. Please, if you find this, help me. They took my Sam." The words seemed to vibrate in Daniel's hand. He looked around the quiet, sun-dusted library, the world of hushed whispers and soft carpeting, and felt this desperate cry from the cold, harsh world outside punch straight through his ribs. He had to call the police. He was already turning toward his desk phone when a shadow fell over the returns cart. The shadow belonged to a man who looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts of a mountain and a leather factory. He was enormous. His denim cut-off vest, a property of Patch declaring him Mac, was covered in intricate embroidery, a winged death's head, the words Hell's Angels arching proudly above it. He had a salt and pepper beard that could house small birds and eyes that had seen things Daniel could only imagine. In his ham-sized hands was a stack of Western novels. "All set, son." Mac's voice was a low rumble, surprisingly gentle. Daniel, usually intimidated by the bikers who sometimes used the library's quiet corners, was too charged with Lucy's plea for fear. Yes, sorry, just found something disturbing." Mac raised a bushy eyebrow. Daniel, acting on an impulse he didn't understand, handed him the note. In a donated book, a kid. Mac took the paper. As he read, the gentle giant vanished. His face, weathered and lined, seemed to turn to granite. The muscles in his jaw bunched. His eyes, a faded blue, turned icy, then blazing. He read it twice, his finger tracing the words, Dock 7 Street. "I know this place," Mac growled, the sound vibrating in the quiet library. "That's near our old charter. Rat territory now, human rats." He looked at Daniel, and the intensity in his gaze was overwhelming. "You call the cops." "I was about to." "Save your breath. For this, they'll file a report. A missing homeless kid. They'll look when they get around to it." He folded the note with surprising care and tucked it inside his vest, right over his heart. "We won't." "We," Daniel squeaked. Mac was already pulling a cell phone from his pocket. He didn't dial. He pressed one button and put it to his ear. "James, it's Mac. Library, now wake up the whole damn club. And Paul, tell him we have a code Sam. I repeat, code Sam. All chapters converge on the original charter house. 1 hour." He paused, listening, because some little girl named Lucy asked for help, and they took her brother. He snapped the phone shut. The entire exchange took 15 seconds. He looked at Daniel. "You're coming." I have to close the library." "It's closed," Mac said, and it wasn't a suggestion. He turned and strode toward the door, his boot heels echoing like gavels. Daniel, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his sternum, grabbed his coat and followed, leaving the world of quiet order behind forever. Outside, the rumble began as a tremor in the concrete. Then it grew. A single Harley turned onto the quiet street, then another and another. They were all colors, all models, but each rider wore the same winged skull. They parked in lines, a steel cavalry dismounting. James, a man with a shrewd face and a calculator-sharp mind, was first to Mac. Paul, older with a serene but commanding presence, arrived next. The note was passed hand to hand. Each man read it, and each face hardened into the same mask of cold, righteous fury. "Code Sam," Paul said, his voice quiet but carrying. "Haven't heard that in years." He looked at the gathered men, now numbering 50. "You all know what it means. A kid's in trouble, our city, our problem, let's ride. Daniel was handed a spare helmet and shoved onto the back of Mac's bike. Hold on, librarian, Mac grunted. And then they were moving, a river of thunder and chrome flowing through the city, parting traffic like the Red Sea. Daniel clung on, terror and exhilaration mixing in his veins. They rode not to Dock 7, but to a large, nondescript warehouse in an industrial zone, the Hells Angels clubhouse. Inside, it was controlled chaos. A giant map of the city was unfurled on a pool table. Men were on phones, on radios. The rumble outside never ceased as more and more bikes arrived. Daniel heard snatches, checked the flophouses on 5th, the old cannery network, those traffickers who were muscling in on the west side. Mac pointed to a younger prospect, a wiry guy named David. You take the librarian, go to Dock 7, find the green van, find the girl, be quiet, be smart. Bring her here, she's the only one who can id the bastards. David nodded. Come on, Bookman. Their journey was in a beat-up pickup, not on a bike. The city's underbelly unfolded outside the window. Dock 7 Street was a graveyard of industry, and there, behind a stinking, dilapidated fish-packing plant, was a rusted green van, one tire flat, windows curtained with dirty fabric. David approached, his movements suddenly silent and predatory. Daniel followed, his loafers crunching on broken glass. A soft, muffled sob came from inside the van. Lucy, Daniel called softly, tapping on the door. Lucy, my name is Daniel. I found your note in the library book. The sobbing stopped, dead silence. Then a latch clicked and the van door slid open a crack. One huge, terrified brown eye peered out. Seeing Daniel's kind, anxious face, the door opened further. The girl was tiny, drowning in a man's oversized hoodie. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair matted. She looked like a wounded sparrow. You found it, she whispered, her voice hoarse. We did, David said, his own voice softer than Daniel would have thought possible. We are here to help. We're going to find Sam, but you need to come with us. You're not safe here. Lucy looked at David's cut, at the skull on his chest, and flinched. Daniel knelt. Lucy, they're the helpers. They're really good at finding people, I promise. Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded, grabbing a ragged backpack. As David helped her into the truck, Daniel saw the inside of the van. A nest of blankets, a few canned goods, 2 carefully drawn pictures taped to the wall, one of a son, one of 2 stick figures, a tall one and a small one holding hands. His throat tightened. Back at the clubhouse, the sight of 400 Hells Angels in full regalia would have been terrifying to anyone. But Mac, Paul, and James had cleared the main floor, creating a quiet space near the map. A woman named Mercy, who had property of Mac on her own cut and the demeanor of a battlefield nurse, came forward with a blanket and a hot chocolate. Hey, sweetheart, she said, her voice warm honey. I'm Mercy. Let's get you warmed up. Lucy, shell-shocked, allowed herself to be led to a chair. Paul knelt before her, removing his own cut to look less intimidating. Lucy, I'm Paul. We need you to be brave just a little longer. Can you tell us about the men who took Sam? Anything you remember. Lucy clutched the mug. They had a black van. It had a big dent on the side like a squashed can. One man had a snake on his neck, a tattoo. The other, he called the snake man Grip. He had a voice like he smoked too much. They said they had a nice place for Sam, that they'd come back for me later. They took him while he was sleeping. A voice rang out from a group by the computers. Grip, that's Marcus Grip Hallen, low-level enforcer for the Vori-backed crew running flesh out of the old textile mills. He's got a neck tattoo of a serpent eating its tail. Paul stood up, his face a storm. The mills, 3 districts over, complex layout. They'll be moving the new stock tonight. He turned to the room. 400 faces looked back, a sea of leather and resolve. We shut it down, all of it. Every road in, every road out. Nobody moves. We find the boy, we send a message. The order rippled out. It wasn't a chaotic charge. It was a military operation. Teams were assigned, perimeter, blockade, entry, extraction. Daniel watched, awestruck, as the empire of the Hells Angels flexed its muscle not for profit or territory, but for a 6-year-old boy named Sam. James approached Daniel and Lucy. We need her to ID the location, the van. She comes in the chase vehicle. You stay with her. He stays with me, Lucy said suddenly, her small hand grabbing Daniel. The librarian, in his corduroy jacket, had become her touchstone in this insane world. Daniel swallowed. I stay with her. The convoy that rolled out minutes later was awe-inspiring. The lead bikes, Mac and Paul at the front, were a wedge of pure noise and light. Behind them, an armada. They fanned out at major intersections, 2 or 3 bikes peeling off to block a road, standing arms crossed in front of their idling machines. They didn't say a word. Their presence was the law, traffic ground to a halt. 3 entire districts were silently, efficiently cut off from the world. Daniel, Lucy, and David were in a black SUV with dark tint, following the main pack. Lucy stared out the window, her eyes wide. "They're all here for Sam," she whispered. "Yeah, kid," David said, a grin touching his lips. "We take care of our own." "But we're not your own." David looked at her in the rearview mirror. "You asked for help. That makes you family today." They reached the crumbling textile mill complex. It was a labyrinth of brick and shadow. The black van with the dent was there, parked behind a chain-link fence. "That's it," Lucy cried, pointing. It was the trigger. From the shadows, men emerged, Grip and his crew, hard-faced, armed with pipes and knives. They saw the wall of headlights, the sea of leather, and their bravado crumpled into panic. What happened next was short, brutal, and decisive. It wasn't a gunfight, it was a tsunami. The Hell's Angels dismounted and advanced. There were scuffles, the sickening thud of fists on flesh, the clatter of dropped weapons. The bikers moved with a coordinated, terrifying efficiency. They overwhelmed the traffickers in minutes, securing them in zip ties. But Sam wasn't in the main building. A frantic search began. Daniel stayed with Lucy in the SUV, holding her hand. "He's here, Lucy. They'll find him." Mac himself came to the window, his knuckles bleeding. "We found a holding room, empty, but there's a basement access, a bolted door." Lucy's face fell, Daniel's heart sank. Then from the comms in the SUV, a crackled voice. "We're in, we have him, he's scared but he's okay, 6-year-old male named Sam." A moment later, Paul emerged from a low doorway, cradling a small blanket-wrapped bundle. He walked straight to the SUV. Daniel opened the door. Lucy tumbled out. Paul knelt, he peeled back the blanket. Sam's face, pale and streaked with tears, blinked in the harsh light. "Lucy," he whimpered. With a cry that tore from the very center of her being, Lucy threw her arms around her brother. They clung to each other, a tiny island of reunited love in a sea of chaos and violence. Daniel felt hot tears spill down his own cheeks. He looked up and saw Mac watching, the big man's eyes shimmering in the flashing light of police cruisers that had finally, belatedly, arrived at the outer perimeter. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Cops, astonished at the scale of the operation, took statements. The traffickers were handed over, along with damning evidence compiled by James. The story, for the authorities, was a tip from a concerned librarian and a citizen's arrest. The true scale of the Hell's Angels' involvement was a silent understanding. Back at the clubhouse, it was a different scene. It was a victory party, but a subdued, profound one. Sam, showered and wearing a prospect's shirt that hung to his knees, was sitting on the pool table, being taught how to roll dice by a giant named Tiny. Lucy was next to Mercy at the bar, eating the first proper meal she'd had in weeks, a cheeseburger and fries. Daniel stood to the side, feeling out of place again. Mac approached, handing him a beer. "You did good, librarian." "I just found a note." "You cared," Mac corrected. "That's the first and most important step." He looked over at the kids. "They got any family?" "No," Daniel said softly, the story having come out in fragments. "Parents gone. They've been on their own for months." Mac nodded, his gaze drifting to Mercy, who was laughing at something Lucy said, gently brushing the girl's hair back. A silent conversation passed between the longtime partners. Mercy's eyes glistened, and she gave an almost imperceptible nod. Paul joined them. "We can't put them back in a van. And the system," he left the sentence hanging, its conclusion dark. "I could," Daniel began, then stopped. He lived in a one-bedroom apartment. He made a librarian's salary. "You could what?" a voice said. It was Mercy walking over, her arm around Lucy. "Daniel, you have a big heart, but this needs a fortress." She looked at Mac. "We have the room and the fence and the family." And so it was decided, not by courts, but by the unshakable will of the club. Lucy and Sam would stay with Mac and Mercy. They had a spare room that became a sanctuary. Daniel became a regular visitor, bringing books, helping with homework. He saw Lucy's smile return, saw Sam's shyness melt away under the rough but genuine affection of 400 uncles. But the story wasn't just about the children. It was about Daniel and the world he'd stepped into, and it was about Jessica. Jessica was Paul's daughter, a law student who helped the club with its legitimate business interests. She was sharp, beautiful, and had a fiery spirit that matched her intelligent eyes. She'd been at the clubhouse that first night, coordinating the legal fallout. Their first meeting was charged with a crackling, unexpected energy. He was organizing a donated set of encyclopedias for the kids in the clubhouse common room. She was arguing a point of contract law with James. "You can't just persuade a zoning board, James. There are procedures," she said, exasperated. "Our persuasion is a procedure," James retorted. Daniel snorted a laugh. They both turned. Jessica's eyes, a striking gray, locked onto his. A slow smile played on her lips. "See, the librarian gets it, nuance." Later, she found him making coffee. "So you're the knight in shining corduroy." "Maury like the accidental tourist," he said, handing her a mug. Their fingers brushed. A jolt, subtle but electric, passed between them. "My dad says you have more spine than you look," she said, leaning against the counter, studying him. "And what do you say?" "I say I'd like to find out," she replied, her tone dropping, holding his gaze just a moment too long before walking away, leaving the scent of her perfume and a promise in the air. Their romance unfolded in the interstices of this dangerous, vibrant world. Furtive, intense conversations in the clubhouse kitchen while a party roared in the next room. A shared cigarette, her habit, not his, on the fire escape, the city lights sprawling below them. He'd walk her to her car, and the goodnight kisses against the driver's side door were not chaste. They were hungry, full of pent-up tension and the thrilling danger of their different worlds colliding. They were charged moments, passionate, a ND Chinese letter of a deeper intimacy, but always clothed, always leaving just enough to the imagination. A breathless pause before pulling away, her lipstick slightly smudged, his heart hammering against his ribs. He learned their code. He saw the loyalty that was an iron bond. He saw the charity runs, the toy drives they organized but never publicized. He saw Mac, the feared enforcer, on his hands and knees, fixing the chain on Sam's new bicycle. He saw Mercy teaching Lucy how to bake, flour dusting both their faces. He saw the Empire not as a criminal monolith, but as a complex, self-sustaining ecosystem with its own harsh justice and profound love. One evening, months later, a family dinner was in full swing at Mac and Mercy. Lucy was talking about school, Sam was showing off a drawing, Daniel and Jessica were there, their hands linked under the table. The door to the clubhouse bar opened, and Paul entered, holding a large, flat package. He nodded at the room, a quiet king surveying his domain. He walked over to Daniel. "For you." Daniel, confused, unwrapped it. It was a framed, beautifully rendered map of the city, but instead of street names, key locations were labeled in a unique script. The library, where it began, Dock 7, Lucy's courage, the mill, Sam's return, and in the center, the clubhouse, labeled simply, family. At the bottom, embroidered on the mat, were the words, Nomad Librarian, Friend of the Club. It wasn't a cut, it was something better, it was acceptance. It was a testament to a different kind of power, the power of a simple act of caring that had mobilized an army. Daniel looked around the table, at Mac's proud nod, Mercy's tearful smile, at Lucy and Sam, safe and loved, at Jessica, whose eyes shone with pride and something deeper, something like forever. The Empire hadn't given up a thing. It had expanded. It had added a librarian, 2 children, and a whole new chapter to its legend. The thunder of the bikes outside was no longer a sound of fear, but a heartbeat, the rhythm of a family forged not by blood, but by a desperate note in a library book and the unwavering code of the winged skull. And as Daniel held Jessica's hand, watching the family he'd helped create, He knew he'd finally found the most compelling story he would ever be a part of, and it was only just beginning. The frame found its place on the wall behind the bar, right between a vintage club charter and a signed photo of Willie G. Davidson, nomad librarian. Daniel ran his fingers over the engraved brass plate at the bottom, the cool metal a tangible anchor in the surreal tide his life had become. The party for the frame's hanging had dissolved into the usual warm, raucous chaos, but a quiet pocket had formed around him and Jessica near the pool table. "It suits you," Jessica said, her shoulder brushing his as she leaned in to study the map. Her perfume, something dark and citrusy, cut through the scents of leather and beer. A nomad who found his oasis, or his war band. "I think I just got adopted by a war band," Daniel murmured, his eyes tracing the illustrated route from the library to this very spot. "I'm not sure what the librarian's duties are in a war band. Archival management of conflict." She turned her head, her gray eyes glinting in the low light. "Oral histories," she said, her voice dropping to an intimate timbre that vibrated in his chest. "Someone has to remember the stories correctly, the why, not just the how." Her gaze flickered to where Lucy, now with clean, braided hair, was carefully explaining the rules of 8-ball to a patiently nodding Mac. "That's the most important part." A comfortable silence settled between them, charged with all the unsaid things of the past months. Their romance was an open secret, a source of gentle ribbing for the club and profound, quiet happiness for them. It existed in stolen moments between her law classes and his library shifts and club events, late-night debates over legal texts that turned into whispered conversations on her sofa, him teaching her the delicate art of book restoration while she explained the Byzantine structure of the club's legitimate holdings, the way her hand would find the small of his back when she entered a room he was in. The clubhouse door swung open, letting in a burst of cool night air and James, followed by a man Daniel didn't recognize. The man wore a suit that was too cheap to look authoritative and carried a nervous energy like a cheap cologne. James's face was a mask of polite neutrality, but his eyes were sharp as flint. He guided the man towards Paul's office. The ambient noise in the room dipped for a fraction of a second, a collective, unconscious awareness tuning in. "Trouble?" Daniel asked softly. "Business," Jessica corrected, but her hand found his, her fingers lacing with his, a protective gesture, the kind that doesn't involve bikes or libraries, probably a landlord from one of the legit properties trying to renegotiate a lease. James handles them, he's the velvet glove. And the others are the iron fist. The fist doesn't need to show itself if the glove is on the right hand, she said cryptically, giving his fingers a squeeze before releasing them. "Come on, let's get some air. The fumes of victory are getting to me." They slipped out the side door into the compound's courtyard, a concrete square softened by a few potted plants Mercy tended and the ghostly glow of security lights. The distant rumble of the city was a bass note to the clubhouse's fadding treble. Here, the charged chemistry between them, always simmering beneath the surface of their daily lives, surged to the forefront. Jessica leaned back against the cool brick wall, pulling him with her into the shadow of a deep eave. The space was intimate, secluded. "You know," she said, her voice a husky whisper near his ear, "when my dad first told me about the librarian who'd walked in with Mac, I pictured someone older, softer." "Disappointed," Daniel breathed, his hands coming to rest on her hips, drawing her closer. The leather of her jacket was cool under his palms, but the heat of her seeped through. "Terrified," she admitted, her lips brushing his jaw, "because the soft ones get chewed up and spat out in this world. But you," she pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, her own searching his. "You walked into the chaos for two kids you didn't know. You stood your ground. You didn't just see the empire, Daniel, you saw the people." Her kiss then wasn't like the others, playful, teasing, heated. It was deep, claiming, a conduit for a flood of emotion, pride, fear, desire, a fierce and shocking love. It was a kiss that spoke of bedrooms and futures, of a partnership that was both a sanctuary and a battlefield. It left them both breathless, foreheads touching, the world narrowed to the shared warmth of their breath in the cool air. "I see you," he whispered back, the words feeling more vulnerable, more dangerous than anything he'd ever said. The side door creaked open, casting a sliver of light. David poked his head out. Sorry to, interrupt the constitutional, he said, not sorry at all, a grin splitting his face. But Paul wants a council, and he wants you both in it. The shift was instantaneous. Jessica's posture straightened, the lover replaced by the strategist. She gave Daniel's hand a final, firm press. Council means it's family business now, she said. You're not a guest anymore. The office was thick with cigar smoke and tension. Paul sat behind his desk, Mac and James in chairs facing him. The man in the cheap suit was gone. Paul gestured for Daniel and Jessica to take the two remaining seats. The man who just left, Paul began, steepling his fingers, was not a landlord. He was a messenger from the remnants of Grip's organization. The Vori backed away after the mill incident cut their losses, but the local scum, they're festering. They think what we did was a moment of weakness, sentimentality. Mac grunted. They think we've gone soft because we took in strays. They see a vulnerability, James clarified, his voice analytical. They're not coming for the kids directly. That would be suicide. They're hitting our edges. A protection payment missed from one of our quieter businesses. A truck with club-affiliated parts broken into. Small, deniable provocations, testing the fences. Why are you telling us? Daniel asked, the us feeling natural yet weighty. Because the message was specific, Paul said, his serene eyes settling on Daniel. They called you the librarian. They suggested that perhaps our new civilian advisor might find his quiet library not so quiet anymore. They're targeting our periphery to see if we'll retract, to see if we'll put the walls back up. A cold knot formed in Daniel's stomach. This was the other side of the empire, the blowback. Jessica's voice was ice. They're trying to isolate us, to make us choose between the family we've built inside and the strength we project outside. Classic divide-and-conquer tactic for weaklings. So what's the play? Mac asked, his voice a low growl. Paul looked at each of them in turn. Mac, his oldest friend, a pillar of brute force and unwavering loyalty. James, the brilliant tactician. Jessica, the future, bridging their world and the legitimate one. And Daniel, the unexpected heart, the catalyst. We do not retract, Paul stated, finality in his tone. An empire that abandons its heart is already a corpse. We show them that the periphery is the core, that the librarian is under our wing, that the children are ours. We respond. Not with a war over territory, but with a statement. He laid out the plan. It was elegant in its severity. The next night, a known dive bar where the agitators congregated would receive a visit, not from a raiding party, from the council itself. Paul, Mac, James, and Daniel. Me, Daniel's voice cracked. You're the point, James said, not unkindly. They threatened our civilian, so our civilian looks them in the eye while we explain the new rules. You don't have to say a word, you just have to be there, unharmed, unafraid. It's about projection, Daniel, Jessica said, her hand covering his on the arm of the chair. Her touch was steadying. They need to see that you are not a liability, you are a declaration. The night of the confrontation, Daniel felt like he was moving in a dream. He was dressed not in leather, but in dark, simple clothes, Jessica's choosing. You look like you belong with us, she'd said, adjusting his collar, her touch lingering. Not like you're trying to be us. She kissed him hard and brief. Just stand beside my father. Watch, learn. The dive bar was a pit of sticky floors and hostile glances. The four of them entered, Paul in the lead, an agging lion still king of every jungle, Mac a looming shadow, James a sharp-suited razor, and Daniel trying to keep his breathing even. Conversation died. The message had been received. The agitators, three wiry men with the predatory eyes of jackals, were at a corner table. Paul walked right up to them. He didn't shout. He didn't posturate. He simply pulled out a chair and sat, gesturing for Daniel to stand beside him. Mac and James flanked them, immovable as cliffs. We heard you had some concerns about our club's focus, Paul began, his voice conversational, about our new priorities. The lead jackal, a man with a spiderweb tattoo on his elbow, sneered. Just saying, Paul, a man spreads himself too thin, he gets weak, starts worrying about story time instead of business. Mac took a half step forward, the floorboard creaking in protest. The jackal flinched. Paul didn't even look at Mac. He kept his eyes on the jackal. Let me clarify our business, he said, and now his voice had lost its serenity, gaining the cold, sharp edge of a guillotine blade. Our business is this city. Our business is our family. That family now includes the boy whose life you trafficked in and the sister you left to starve. It includes the man who found her. He tilted his head slightly toward Daniel. You look at him and see a weakness. I look at him and see the reason we remember who we are supposed to be. He leaned forward just an inch. The message you sent was received. Here is our reply. If a single hair on the head of any member of our family is disturbed, if another payment is missed, if another tire is slashed, if a librarian gets a threatening look on his way to work, we will not come for you. We will come for everything you have, every hole you crawl into, every dollar you've hidden, every friend who owes you a favor. We will erase you from the ecosystem, not with noise, with silence. Do you understand the business now? The jackal's bravado had evaporated, replaced by a pallor that spoke of understood truths. The Vori had abandoned them. They were alone, and they had just threatened the heart of a beast that had shown it had teeth, claws, and a long, long memory. He gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. Good, Paul said, rising smoothly. He turned, and the four of them walked out, the silent bar watching them go. Not a word had been spoken by Daniel, but his presence had been the entire sermon. Outside, in the cool night, Daniel sucked in a deep breath. His legs felt like water. James clapped him on the shoulder. You held your ground, that's all that was needed. Back at the compound, the relief was palpable. The statement had been made. The Empire had not just defended its borders, it had redefined them, publicly and irrevocably. The celebration this time was quieter, deeper. It was held in Mac and Mercy's living room, a true family affair. Lucy played a hesitant but sweet melody on a second-hand keyboard Mercy had found. Sam, asleep on the rug, used Mac's boot as a pillow. Daniel stood by the window, watching the peaceful scene. Jessica came up beside him, sliding her arm around his waist, resting her head on his shoulder. You're in it now, she murmured, all the way. I know, he said, and for the first time, there was no trepidation in the knowledge, only a profound sense of belonging. It's where I'm supposed to be. Paul joined them, holding 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to Daniel. A toast, he said, raising his own. To the nomad librarian, you came with a note. You brought us back our souls. The Empire stands taller tonight because of you. He drank, his eyes holding Daniel over the rim of the glass. It was the final seal. Daniel drank, the whiskey burning a warm path down his throat, a warmth that spread through his entire being. He looked around the room, at Mac's protective hand on Mercy's shoulder, at Lucy's concentrating face, at Sam's peaceful sleep, at James sketching a business plan on a napkin, at David laughing quietly by the door, at Jessica, warm and solid against him. Thank you for watching. This story proves that family isn't always born, it's sometimes found in the most unexpected places. Have you ever found something that changed a life? Comment family below and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories where an ordinary moment becomes an extraordinary mission.